I do want to sort of extend the conversation because, just to be clear, I certainly want to advocate that traditions of radical blackness, black radical traditions, just an honest assessment and analysis of the situation would call for solidarity among Africans in America, through the diaspora, and certainly with those suffering in Palestine. But this seems to be continues to just come up in, I think, a very confused way. So I want to come back to that piece where I showed in that Spectre article, it was brought up that Frank Wilderson just dismisses any potential unity between Black people here in the US and Palestinians. And where it was said that he said that the idea itself was bullshit, quote. And the link in that article goes to the text of an interview that I and my I Mix What I Like crew from WPFW 89.3 FM, the mighty WPFW in Washington, D.C., where we were doing our show there. And some years ago had interviewed Frank. I think this is 10 years ago now. And we were talking about his work in Afropessimism. We had interviewed him a number of times, starting with his work in Incognegro, which for me, has been, I think, part of the conflict, so to speak, with how I engage Frank's work and how others do. So I did start with Incognegro, his memoir, where he talks about being a part of the armed underground in South African anti-apartheid struggles and working with Chris Hani, and we took him at his word. I take him at his word that the story is true, but I've also said to him publicly on this platform, and say it again, at some point I admit I don't care if the memoir is not true, because what he did in telling that story, I think, was brilliant in its analysis and very inspirational. So that's how, anyway, that was the bias with which I came to the whole question of Frank Wilderson's work and Afropessimism. I had not even read his Afropessimism arguments, didn't even know anything about it. We read that book. So as I continued reading and I kept seeing this issue come up, and I've continued to see that this interview that we did some years ago continues to get brought. I'll put the link in the show description again. I forgot to do it in advance. When Nora Ericott was on the program, I don't know, a year or so ago, 2 years ago, I don't know, whenever it was, this was one of the issues that she wanted us to clear up. I thought we had. I don't know, but the issue itself has not seemed to be cleared up. So what I'll do is I want to show. So I showed the Spectre article. They said where Frank said it's bullshit. So here's the text of, and I'll make sure all these links are available if they aren't already. And this is the section where this part comes up. And part of the issue is, of course, that none of the other part of the rest of the interview was ever discussed. So the context is not really ever brought in. His approach to anti-blackness, his approach to Afropessimism, his approach to the critique, his argument around it just being an idea. It's not even a full. I forgot how he puts it, but in other words, it's just an approach that I think I keep oversimplifying as being an update of a race-first analysis, arguing that there's such a severe anti-blackness alienation, natal, what is it, social death, and I can't even remember all the terminology. But my point is, all of this is ignored because at this point of the interview, uh, he says here, one of the things we need to deal with is the ways in which right reactionary white civil society has so-called progressive. Wait a minute. One of the things we need to deal with is the ways in which right reactionary white civil society and so-called progressive colored civil society really works to sever the black generation's understanding of what happened in the past. So right now, pro-Palestinian people are saying Ferguson is an example of what is happening in Palestine, and y'all are getting what we're getting. That's just bullshit. First, there's no time period in which black people and slave domination have ever ended. Second, the Arabs and the Jews are as much a part of the black slave trade, the creation of blackness as social death as anyone else. As I told a friend of mine, yeah, we're going to help you get rid of Israel, but the moment you set up your shit, we're going to be right there to jack you up because anti-blackness is as important and necessary to the formation of Arab psychic life as it is to the formation of Jewish psychic life. I believe that looking at it from an anti-capitalist perspective, from an anti-white supremacist perspective, the Palestinians are right, provisionally, until they get their shit. Then they're wrong. So this is a historical thing. What we have to do is remind each other to know our history in terms of slavery and our resistance to it, but also to be able to have X-ray vision and say that just because we're walking around in suits and ties and are professors and journalists doesn't mean we're not slaves. That is, to understand things diachronically, and that will allow us to be in coalition with people of color, moving on the system with them, but ridiculing them at the same time for paucity, the lameness of their desire and demand. And for the fact that we know once they get over their own hurdles, the anti-blackness that sustains them will rear its ugly head again against us, so that we don't fall into a sort of genuine bonding with people who are really primarily using black energy to catalyze and energize their struggle. In Ferguson, we can see the problem. So many people in the streets declaring, I am human too. And there it is, the symptoms of black recognition that we are up against something much larger than just police brutality, much larger than poverty and discrimination, that we are still unconscious. As we're marching in the streets and angry at and a reporter comes and sticks a microphone in our face and will yell, I am human too. If that's the first words out of so many people's mouths, then the unconscious is trying to tell you something about the real nature of your oppression that even you can't handle. And I say you, meaning me too, because I don't like to think about this all the time, and I write about it. But what Ferguson is doing is providing a space in which black youth primarily, because I'm sorry to say that I'm almost 59 years old, and most of the people my age are not contributing to this dialogue in the way that I would like them to, can use their skepticism and their anger to say, wait a minute, I'm not going for the okey doke from Al Sharpton, who says, don't riot because this is not about you. What do you mean this is not about me? And what do you mean don't riot? Are you about dealing with this situation, or are you giving this speech as another form of black anger management? End quote. So I understand, taken out of context, taken in that one graph, it comes across as maybe terse, caustic, but I don't think that the underlying point he's making is given fair run when it's just dismissed as, oh, he's saying we can't be in solidarity with Palestinians, and any notion of that is bullshit. Why is he saying it's bullshit? Not because he's saying we shouldn't be in as I interpret it, not because he's saying we shouldn't be in solidarity with Palestinians, but he's saying that that doesn't get to the true nature of what our problem is, or what the black condition is in relationship to these state white formations. And I think it's unfair and I do admit a bias that not only in terms of the way I was introduced to his story in Incognito, but I do admit a bias when it feels to me that like anyone, including other black people, are telling black people you don't have a right to analyze any situation in any way, that you don't have a right or have no room or should be dismissed because you've raised a question that I at least has a sound basis in historical fact and logic. So I've always I've always struggled with, even where I don't fully agree. We've talked about it with Frank, where I don't always agree or I don't always understand. But my point is always kind of the same with all of us. I feel like there's not enough room for principled and even just comradely disagreement, and I don't understand why. I think, well, I could speculate, but I don't like that so much is so quick to just want to dismiss even a conversation or an investigation of what is actually being said. And it's not even necessary in a piece like the Spectre piece to even make reference to this. What is the point other than to hold Frank up as a straw man so that you can make the point that black people should be in solidarity? What about all of, is there no one else who you think is discouraging that? Why is Frank dragged into that? And then I do feel a kind of way that it also involves an interview that I was a part of, and so kind of like with the trained Marxist things, my name keeps coming up in some of these little Google alerts and little footnotes here and there. And I'm like, man, and because I get my Google Scholar alerts and stuff like, and this article gets referenced a lot actually. And I think and I rarely, if ever, see it fairly referenced. And none of his other discussion is referenced. It's like, so, or the rest of that interview even. So I did want to, because this, of course, when Frank was last on the show, this came up. I started the show with this. So I just want to recap and let him speak for himself on this issue, and then we can move on. In a recent interview I did with Nora Erekat, the Palestinian lawyer and activist, she had put me in, she put me up on an interview that she had done with Mark Lamont Hill, where our interview for some years ago, one of them, a transcript of them, was used as a way to discredit Afropessimism and to say that Afropessimism encourages a lack of solidarity. And in that excerpted piece, you were saying, and I don't know, the transcript rang true to my memory at least. What you were basically saying is that, listen, Palestinians will work with them and we'll struggle with them, but after we get them free from Israel, we're going to have to check them on their anti-blackness. And I said, I agreed. But this was extrapolated to mean that there can be no solidarity. And I've heard this many times. People have said this to me a lot. And I've always said, but I don't get that from your work. Now, it is true I don't understand everything, including your latest book. I'm not going to claim to understand it all. We'll get to that in a minute. But so I wanted to really just start right there. Can you just clarify before we get into the depth as much as possible of of the theory? Is your argument intending to discourage black people from struggling at all, from appreciating their radical political histories? And are you saying that there should be no solidarity with other folks? Because to the point about Lewis Gordon, since then, I have read a good number of the critics. And on these issues, I don't understand or agree with what they're saying in terms of how they interpret your work. But anyway, so let's just start there. Are you saying any of that in your work, intending to at least?
Absolutely not. However, I do understand how it could be perceived as my having said that, because most people come at a unequivocally Black cry and an unapologetically Black analysis of everyone else. In other words, people experience us looking at them analytically as an assault on them. And And so what happens is that Afropessimism is an analytic interpretation of everyone else's capacity. I'll repeat that, an analytic interpretation of everyone else's capacity. And just as Marx condemns the capacity of the capitalist, whether it's a good capitalist like George Soros, who is actually, I want to give a shout out to George Soros because he's part of the distribution network for Afropessimism when he poured millions of dollars into urban debate camps. What he did is he created a pipeline for Afropessimist texts to be infused in the inner city without even knowing what he did. So thank you, my man. You know what I'm saying? but what I'm trying to say is that what I don't give a fuck about. Can I swear on here?
Absolutely.
Okay. I really don't care that the sentimental response to the analytic critique clouds the other person's capacity to understand the analysis. I think that we, for hundreds of years, we have reached across the water and tried to help these people understand our suffering and understand their relationship to it. And that's a kind of cosmic manifestation that began, over 1,400 years ago in the Bantu migration. It's called Ubuntu, which means goodwill and compassion and love of the other. And so what you can rightfully say is that there is no Ubuntu in Afropessimism. It's just a cold gaze. But that doesn't mean that it's actually saying what the other people experience it to be saying. Solidarity is, I mean, I'm checking myself now at 65 on my solidarity. I'm fucking sick of it. I have struggled in more people's oppression contexts who are not Black over the past 53 years than I have in decidedly Black struggles. And so attitudinally, I don't have any more energy or compassion for someone who can't see that what you just said at the very beginning, that Israel is a blight on, if not the world, the Middle East. The United States is a blight on the world, and Israel is a extension of that blight. And so much in the Middle East would be restabilized if Israel did not exist. But that restabilization would not do anything essential for the liberation of Black people. And I did a 6-hour Afropessimist workshop for 35 activists / leaders of Black Lives Matter from Pennsylvania, New York City, and New Jersey back in 2016. This was at actually the Audubon Ballroom, which is now the Malcolm X Shabazz Foundation. And in that 6-hour workshop, the Black Lives Matter people talked to me about a sojourn they took to Palestine for 2 weeks, in which they were going with this whole idea that Ferguson is Palestine. And before they went, they had asked the Palestinians in Gaza if they could meet, and Ramallah, if they could meet Black Palestinians. And they were told yes. And when they got there, they were redirected for almost 10 days away from meeting any Black Palestinians. And when they finally put their foot down and insisted that they do that, they had one-on-ones with Black Palestinians who talked about the structural feeling of anti-Blackness that they experience in a community that's being bombed every day by the Israelis, okay? They didn't talk about Israeli anti-Blackness. They talked about Palestinian anti-Blackness. I had the same experience when I spent 6 weeks in Cuba, and this is, and I'm really sick and tired of people, and what I mean by that is I was with Medea Benjamin's group, Global Exchange, in Cuba for 6 weeks. And we were 13 Americans, 3 of us Black, and we were paired with 2 young communists And we went all around the island together for that period. And we met with government officials and went to hospitals. It was a groovy experience. And then at one point, the Black Cubans said, we would like a session with the Black Americans, just the 3 Black Americans. And so 3 Black Americans met with about 8 Black Cubans out of that 26 group of Black Cubans. And the white people from the United States, the 10 white people, were like, okay, cool. We'll go on a field trip for a day. So y'all can have the crib. We lived in this big house in Verdado, which was a rich neighborhood that had been subdivided for poor people. But the white Cubans were like, what the hell is going on? We're all communists here. We're all, and to make matters even worse, this is why psychoanalysis is so important to Afropessimism, because the force of the unconscious is what you described to me in your opening remarks. And the force of the unconscious actually doesn't have any relational dynamic to it. The force of the unconscious was such that these 3 Black Americans, one of them was fluent in Spanish. Another one was taking intermediate Spanish. I was taking beginning Spanish, okay? But because I was the oldest, I guess, I don't know, or maybe the darkest, I don't know. But the white Cubans vamped on me and demanded that I come to some kind of luncheon tribunal with them where they accused me of fomenting racial divisions on the island. This is a global phenomenon where these people feel victimized by our critique of their capacities to be, and often of how they use their capacities. And I'm very sorry. Afropessimism is about them. It is not to them. There's been too many hundreds of years of Ubuntu where we have said, okay, how are you feeling about this? How are you experiencing this? Okay, I don't give a rat's ass anymore. So in that regard, they're right. But in terms of the analytic, they're absolutely wrong, because I've done nothing but solidarity work throughout my whole goddamn life.
So again, I'll make the link available if it's not already there. You can watch that whole interview. But and I see you too, Hiram. I see like a lot of good people. I'm here for it. But I guess all I can say is when folks drag his name, I don't think that they, and in fact, Hiram, a lot of people who got that problem with him.
You just don't read, beloved.
But listen, my point is, whatever. What could I say? We're not always going to agree and be on the exact same page, But I just think it's unfair to drag him in the way that article did, and the way he keeps getting dragged when I don't think people are hearing what he's saying. So, okay.